What's up, champs? Welcome to another episode of the Short Shifts Fantasy Hockey Podcast, brought to you by Keeping Carlsson. I am your host, Louis Ezekiel. Joining me tonight, my pal and yours, Jeremy Versillo. Jeremy, how are you doing out there on the West Coast on this fine Tuesday evening?
Well, I'm freezing just like the rest of North America is right now. Seattle hit, I think, 13 degrees overnight a couple days ago, which is the coldest it has been in the 10 years I've lived here. So, getting into some hockey weather here.
I was going to say, I was like teeing myself up for a joke about how maybe it got down to like 40 degrees and everybody was wearing sweaters and stuff, because I know that's how we do out in Seattle, but that's legitimately pretty chilly. It's no Midwest, out here in Kalamazoo, we are at a balmy 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And the wind chill has been at -20 the last 2 days and is supposed to be tomorrow. So it's been me and the kids hanging out because all of us have been away from school through that period. So yeah, it's been kind of a wild weekend. We got a ton of snow on Friday, but we haven't been able to play in it outside of Friday itself because it's just been too darn cold to get out there. So, hopefully it'll warm up here soon. I think the kids are going a little stir crazy. I took them to the climbing gym yesterday, and I think that helped a little bit. But yeah, we're running out of good cold weather activities that we can do inside. So bring back the school.
Yeah, anything to get them outside and out of your hair for a bit, right?
Well, yeah, and, just something to keep them entertained and find something interesting to do that they will enjoy. But we got to move on because we have lots to talk about here today. So our first big headline here, and a really interesting and I think challenging question kind of for fantasy managers, is the question of Val Nichushkin went into the player assistance program. As per usual, we don't have a ton of details about what might be going on in there, but that leads us to the question here of what do you do with a guy like Nichushkin who, we don't really know what the future is going to hold. He could be gone for a short period of time, or you could be, lugging along an empty slot for quite a while. I know you were the one who introduced this question. So, what are you thinking about, what to do with Val Nichushkin here, while we wait to find out, what comes next?
Well, in my case, I am rolling my head trying to get information on any of the 5 injuries on my team with 2 IR slots. But in the terms of Nichushkin, he's probably the most cuttable of those injury guys. Player assistance program stays have been anywhere from 30-ish days to half the season where he won't be back at all. The reason I'm hedging towards keeping him, though, is the 1-month window, which is kind of the min stay, and hopefully the time frame will get some more information, includes the All-Star break. So remember, there's only 3 matchup weeks in the next 4 weeks. So if you can survive a week or 2 with him on your bench, or even better in your IR, definitely worth holding on to. He'd be one of the biggest IR stashes if he gets dropped by a manager in a crunch like I am. But also, it just may take him a while to get right. You gotta be hoping for the person, not the player, and that he's going to fix whatever he's going through and be able to get on with his life. And that could take a while. It's a hard situation.
Yeah, I appreciate you having some compassion for the human being behind the jersey. Sometimes as fantasy managers, we can be very mercenary. So, yeah, I think that's the right thing to do. And, yeah, absolutely. I think you brought up a point that's really valuable, and that is this really just depends on what your situation is. Because, yes, those teams that are cruising towards a playoff spot, he would be an outstanding stash. But for those teams who are struggling to get in, if he were on my team, for instance, I would be probably ready to give him the cut because, every week counts, and carrying that empty slot, I think, can be quite painful. So really, yeah, I think this is a question of how long do you think you can sustain your position until we learn more. Obviously, the sooner you decide to make that cut, if that is what you ultimately decide to do, the sooner you're going to start gaining that marginal benefit. But of course, the longer you can wait for more news, you're going to be able to make a decision, with as much info as possible. But yeah, I think I would be team cut right now, just based on my position in my leagues. But I could certainly see go in another direction if you felt comfortable. And I think if you are one of those teams that is comfortably winning your league, I would keep an eye out for him potentially hitting the wire. Because, yeah, like you said, that could be an outstanding stash that could potentially be even a league winner, if he gets back up and ends up on that first power play, in crunch time in March, maybe. All right. And then we have another player who's kind of in an interesting situation. He did get himself a start, I believe, but Elvis Merzlikins, who is looking like a guy who wants out of Columbus, and certainly maybe not the only one with the way things have going and with the way things are going with management. But kind of give us an update on what's going on with Elvis Merzlikins here, who, some people saw, certainly I thought at the start of the year, we had some hopes that Columbus could kind of get right a little bit and he could be, a useful addition for some of our 0G type people who don't want to burn a pick, with single digits on a goalie.
Well, Elvis Merzlikins the past few weeks has been kind of relegated to a backup or 1B. They've been giving Daniil Tarasov, their bright young prospect, a lot of the starts. The coach or the GM, someone said something about how they want to see what they have in Tarasov, and so they need to give him a run of starts in a row. Merzlikins apparently wasn't happy about this, though. He's on the record saying he won't be a backup, and in the post-game press conference of a big win yesterday, he said that he had requested a trade, which is a weird time to kind of publicly announce that you've requested a trade after you've just won a big game for your team. But I do think he's going to be on the block for the trade deadline. There's some teams that need goalies, although I'm not sure there's many teams that have the cap space to fit Merzlikins' contract. He's got a couple years left at $5.4 million, I believe, off the top of my head. And I'm not convinced he's going to get traded, and if he doesn't, it's probably a 50-50 going forward, which makes him a hard goalie to own in fantasy, just complicated by the will they, won't they trade conundrum.
Yeah, and there's no guarantee, obviously, that a trade would necessarily end up in a better situation, like you say, especially if he's going to a contending team. There aren't a ton of contending teams that have a clear and obvious, both the cap space and the opportunity available there. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I thought that interview was refreshingly honest. It was nice to get somebody talking straight to us a little bit. So I thought that was kind of cool. And, like you said, a little bit maybe unorthodox, but, he put it out there and he kind of, said what he felt like he needed to say. So I appreciate that, certainly. Let's transition now to a whole host of injuries and outjuries. Let's start in Calgary, where we had kind of a questionable situation here. Jacob Markstrom has been having a really nice comeback season. Obviously, a couple years ago, he led the league in shutouts. Last year, he was a big disappointment to the people who drafted him based on his previous performance. And then again, it's just sort of been just not repeating what was done the year before generally. So he's been doing really well. We heard Elon and Brian talk about them on the Mega Show over the weekend. Wolf was called up. Vladar is starting here this evening. It's a 0-0 game right now. Toronto and Edmonton await on Thursday and Saturday, so I would proceed with a certain degree of caution if you're going to look at Dustin Wolf or Dan Vladar potentially to grab a start in there. Those are quite busy days as well. So I would say it's more just sort of something to keep an eye on, if you are desperate for a spot there. But I would imagine if you are the Markstrom owner, you might be able to find more favorable matchups than a Toronto game or an Edmonton game. Just my 2 cents there.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that. I'm kind of afraid of both Toronto and Edmonton lighting up a mediocre goalie or an untested goalie. And the odds are whoever you pick up, say you pick someone up for Thursday, probably won't get Saturday's game. My guess is, unless one of them has an absolute stud-like performance, they'll probably give both of them some time, and there's no guarantee Markstrom's not back by then either. they don't have any confirmation of what the injury is. We just know he left practice early and is not playing today.
Yeah, so that makes me think that maybe it wasn't so bad. And, you know, as excited as we are about our Dustin Wolfs and our Jesper Wallstedts, you know, they have very bright futures, but they're, you know, for goalies especially, I think success at a young age is hard to come by, and especially when you have some of these tough matchups, you know, as we learned with Wallstedt last week. Yeah, it's really difficult. And I think as a fantasy manager, you got to be cautious not to have your eyes filled with stars when you look at these guys with very bright futures and say, yeah, now's the time, you know, that we're really going to be able to capitalize on this. So be cautious there, would be my advice. Let's head over to your hometown Seattle Kraken. Give us a rundown here. We wanted to mention Beniers, Burakovsky, and Dunn all made our list. Give us the update out in old Seattle here, the Emerald City.
Beniers was put on IR today, so it sounds like he's out a bit longer term, although I question whether or not he was fantasy relevant in any redraft league this year. He's been really in a bit of a sophomore slump. Vince Dunn didn't play yesterday or today in the back-to-back, and there really hasn't been much word on what's ailing him. Ryker Evans took over some of the offensive duties, including a power play unit. I really like Ryker Evans as a prospect, but assuming Dunn's back in the near future, not really worth a pickup. And Andre Burakovsky is also nursing some sort of injury. Again, don't know what it is. I suspect we'll have more updates on all three when the Kraken return from their road trip, which I forget what day they get back. It's probably either a Saturday or early next week. I think they're on a bit of a longer road trip, or maybe they come back Thursday.
All right, and then moving down the line, another pretty significant injury, and this one, you know, to borrow a phrase from an old movie, really escalated quickly. It went from being Jack Eichel being out with what we thought was maybe just a skate blade problem to kind of get repaired. Now it's being reported that he had lower body surgery and is week to week. Now, listen, I am not a doctor. I would imagine if we're talking about recovery from surgery, no matter kind of how minor it might be, let's assume that this is probably going to be a 2-week absence. Is that fair to say? I mean, I don't know a whole lot of, I know these athletes are a different breed, obviously, but if I was getting lower body surgery, I'd probably be out for, 2 months. So let's cut that, let's cut that into quarters and say that Eichel might be able to make it back in 2 weeks. Hopefully we'll have some more serious information soon, because me just spitballing here is not very useful. But I would imagine we're going to see Eichel out for a bit. In the meantime, Chandler Stephenson has been lining up with Stone and Dorofeyev. And so he might be the guy who stands to benefit from Eichel's absence. In the last 2 games, he's got a goal and 2 assists. So might be a guy potentially to keep an eye on, whether you are the person putting Eichel on IR or you are looking to capitalize on Eichel's absence.
I agree. Chandler Stephenson is really interesting. Got to keep an eye on that first power play unit too, whoever they're putting there. I will say, I think your timeline for 2-week minimum is about right with the surgery. First issue would be getting the stitches out from whatever was surgically repaired. That would happen at 2 weeks. That's probably the earliest he starts skating on it, which means, okay, probably 2.5 to 3 weeks is what the week-to-week timeline is. Week-to-week's also my least favorite timeline in hockey, because it can mean anything from 2 weeks to 6 to 8. And Vegas has not been very good with injury updates this year. I ranted last show about the Aiden Hill situation, then there's still no clarity there. Additionally, Shea Theodore, I believe, has surpassed his 4 to 6 week timeline, and we don't even have an update yet. So, yeah, just hold on to Eichel. There's nothing you can do. Hopefully he's back by the All-Star break. That's kind of what I'm, reaching towards with my very injured squad right now, is please get me an All-Star break and get me some good news over that.
Yeah, I think I would guess that the 2 weeks is maybe like, yeah, you're looking at your minimum here. So who really knows? And obviously, hopefully by Thursday, we'll be able to tell you something a little more. But if Vegas remains as tight-lipped as they have been, we may not be able to tell you a whole lot more. All right, one more significant injury of note before we get to some better news with some outjuries with Patrick Kane. Was injured. It's been reported by Derek Lalonde that whatever the injury is, it is not related to his hips. So obviously that's good news as he had that hip resurfacing procedure. In his absence, Joe Veleno saw some increased ice time. He played on the wings line 2 with Comfer and Alex DeBrincat, and also on that kind of power play 1B. They're pretty close to even. I think they were about 40 seconds off, from each other in the last game, but it's DeBrincat, Fabry, Sprong, Seider with Veleno out there taking Patrick Kane's spot, at least in that most recent game. Still talking about like low teens in terms of minutes for Veleno. So not a surefire ad potentially, but Detroit does have a very nice Wednesday, Friday, Sunday schedule this week. So that could make Veleno potentially a useful ad, although I do want to caution our listeners. They're playing Florida, Carolina, and Tampa Bay. Those are not necessarily easy outs. And if one of those teams can really control the run of play against the Red Wings, I think it could be hard for a young guy like Veleno to really make an impact. But I'm sure the Red Wings are hopeful, both that he can fill in and that Kane will be back sooner rather than later. The tone I guess I got from the information we were getting is that, it's bad, but not apocalyptic. We are in a situation where I shouldn't even say bad, that it's not terrible. But it's obviously less than ideal, and it's going to be a little bit before we see Kane, I would imagine, at least this remaining week. But we'll see how things go. We did have somebody who came back earlier than expected, so a little bit of good news for all of those Kyle Connor owners. A little bit beyond 5 weeks of his 6 to 8 week prognosis. Connor has returned here on Tuesday night against the Islanders. He's been lined up with Iafallo and Lowry to start, so obviously not an ideal spot with Scheifele injured. But this does give us a chance to add one little other bit of injury-outree news, and that is there is some hope that with this kind of longer gap between Tuesday's game against the Islanders and Saturday's game, that Scheifele will be able to work his way back into the lineup during that time. So it's possible that by Saturday we might have a more complete Winnipeg Jets lineup, and I would be worried if I were those teams that are facing them, because the Jets have just been outstanding. Even during these weeks when Connor was out, they were able to compensate and really make it work. And obviously they are leading on some outstanding goaltending, primarily from Connor Hellebuck, but also from Laurent Brossoit during those times when Hellebuck is on the bench. Let's head over and talk about some younger players. We've got one in Anaheim and one in New York. Jeremy, why don't you take the lead for us on these guys?
Well, both Leo Carlsson and Kakko Kaapo returned to the lineup after a short absence for Carlsson and a long one for Kakko. They both jumped right back into first-line roles. Carlsson is playing on the Ducks' first line and power play 1. Kakko's playing up with Zibanejad and Kreider on, I guess it's still technically the first line in New York, even though Panarin's line is doing most of the scoring. I have more interest in Carlsson of the two, although with the way the Ducks' schedule plays out, I'm waiting for at least next week before making that move in any of my leagues, so I probably won't get him. Kakko, I just don't believe in unless he starts showing something. He's been on that line for quite a bit and hasn't done much fantasy relevance. So, yeah, those are the two young guys who have just come back from injury.
Yeah, I think the hope for Kakko might be to see him, maybe start to turn a corner the way Alexis Lafreniere has, but obviously, being injured is a bit of a setback for him there. The good news, I think, for Carlsson owners is that he has played both games of the back-to-back, which had not happened yet, obviously. If you've been paying attention to what's going on with the Ducks, there's this load management plan for Carlsson, which is kind of weird just because you don't often see people very publicly talking about, we don't know how many games this guy can handle. Young people I think they can play quite a bit, but they've made up their minds about how they want to do it, and far be it from me to tell them, how to use their young asset. But exciting, I think, to see Carlsson take both ends of the back-to-back, although, of course, they were shut out by the Washington Capitals, who've been pretty suspect defensively, but good on him to get into back-to-back games, and hopefully we'll get to see a little more of that moving forward. All right, we are going to jump into a quick little ad break here, but we will see you on the other side, folks. You are listening to Short Shifts. Welcome back to Short Shifts. We've got some really interesting hot and cold streaks here, Jeremy. I want to jump right into them. Let's start with TJ Oshie. He's sort of been taking over for the missing Ovechkin shots. Ovechkin's been day-to-day for 3 games here. Oshie has 2 goals in the last, I got to update this for tonight. He has 2 goals in the last 3 games. Also an assist here tonight. My shot numbers are not updated, but he did have 11 shots and 5 hits in those previous 2 games. And has been playing on the top line with Dylan Strome and Max Pacioretty. As far as if Oshie is floating around on your waiver wire, I do like him as a short-term ad potentially, but his schedule this week is, pretty weak with the, your standard Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So he might be hard to get in, and Ovi could be back at any time, to the extent that a line in Washington can cook. I thought that the Strome, Pacioretty, Ovechkin line was doing so. So that has been a nice spot, and you would hope that they would reunite them. But in the meantime, if Oshie is available, he might be a guy who could potentially be interesting for you. Why don't we've talked about you led the way with the Ducks last time. Tell us a little bit about what's going on with our cold Ducks player.
Real quick on Oshie, my only minor concern.
Yeah, please.
My only minor concern with him is whether or not he'll maintain power play 1, because best I can tell with Ovechkin back, there are 5 forwards vying for 4 power play slots. That would be Ovechkin, Pacioretty, Strome, Oshie, and Wilson. And Oshie and Wilson kind of do the same thing. I suspect it's going to be Oshie. It's been him in the past. But keep an eye on that. If he gets bumped off power play 1, that's a big downer for his value.
Yeah, I think with all due respect to what Wilson brings to the table, I would prefer to have Oshie there, assuming he can hack it. I know he's getting a little older, but I think that is something to keep an eye on, certainly. All right, and then you were going to talk about a Ducks player.
The cold duck you're referring to is none other than Mason McTavish. He's had a very promising campaign this year, really young guy. But he's found himself in a bit of a slump and in the doghouse lately. He's only got 6 points in his last 13 games. His shots have been trending more towards 1s and 2s than towards 3s and 4s. And he got demoted to the 3rd line in the middle of last game, Monday, and played there today, Tuesday, because of a bad giveaway that led to a goal. I think he'll bounce back from it, but the Ducks do have kind of a glut of center depth and power play 1 talent. I'm not sure he's going to be super valuable outside of some deeper leagues or banger scenarios. Looks like he was on power play 2 the past 4 or 5 games also, and his ice time is trending down towards 15 minutes instead of up at 20 where it used to be.
Yeah, I do think that is, an area potentially for concern. Like you said, a little bit in the doghouse here, ending up way down on the list. I do think probably it's a guy I'm willing to wait on, but beginning to find myself a little bit more concerned about them than I sort of thought I would be at this point. So another one to keep an eye on here. All right, let's head now to talk about a cold Maple Leaf. And maybe I'm trying to anti-jinx my guy into getting some progress here. But John Tavares, who had just been shooting I don't even know what I wanted to say here, but just, shooting the rubber off the puck here, including some games with 7 shots and 9 shots and rarely below 4. But over these last 5 games, Tavares' shooting has really cooled off, and, his scoring has tailed off, along the way as well. And obviously that shot volume is valuable for anybody in a categories league that counts it, or a points league that assigns a point value to those shots. Just a little worried about him lately. Obviously, I don't think there's anything you can do. He's on that top power play, so I think he's a guy that you want to hold on to. But I've just got my eye on him in terms of a guy who's kind of struggling a bit. Maybe he's somebody you want to reach out to the Tavares owner and sort of kick the tires and see if there is a potential trade to be made there. But that's one guy who I've got on my roster who just has been a total rock to start the season, but has me a little bit worried with his performance lately. A guy not worrying you with his performance lately and out on a lot of waiver wires, I imagine, although a lot of Colorado players were getting picked up, is Sam Girard. And Jeremy, I know you prepped something on Sam Girard here. Tell me what he's been up to.
So Sam Girard was actually my streamer recommendation in our little host group chat, so I'm pretty happy with how that one went. In 2 games this week, he has a goal and 3 assists, but stepping back even further, in 9 games since returning from the player assistance program, he has 7 assists, not a lot of shots, but he's also taking 2 to 4 hits and blocks every game except for 1 in there. And those type of peripherals can be really valuable, especially when we already know that Sam Girard is a big 2-way even strength defenseman who's going to give you 35 to 40 points no matter what.
Yeah, I really like to see that, definitely. He is in a spot where obviously his scoring upside is capped because of the guys who are in front of him, so he's got to make do with the time that he's got available. And we've been kind of seeing the depth of Colorado come through. I mean, obviously they had 2 goals from Rantanen tonight. He's outstanding, but your Logan O'Connors, your Ross Coltons, some of these guys who, don't have the same pedigree really have been, showing up. Sam Malinsky is another one who's been pretty hot for, Colorado lately. They had 7 goals today, so everyone feels a little bit hot there. But that's been really nice to see. So, keep an eye out for those guys. I know the schedule gets a little trickier next week. Not the fine schedule they had going here in the early days of, this fantasy matchup, but some guys to keep an eye on. Kind of the flip side of that here. I wanted to mention Brayden Schenn, who has a very boring and bad schedule this week. And maybe I'm giving away a little bit of my strategy here. So, my tier 3 Boris competitors, you know a little bit about what I'm thinking, but, on last Tuesday's show, I was all set to tell everybody that they were snoozing if they still had Schenn on their rosters. But he scored before the show started, and I decided to scrap the card to make room for some more important stuff. And I'm glad I did, because he's added 4 assists in 3 games since that 1-goal outing on January 9th. His deployment is still pretty iffy. Secondary PP time, mostly playing with Saad and second quarter Jake Neighbors, who is not first quarter Jake Neighbors. But he did have a little bit of successful game time with Jordan Kyrou last game as well. He's hot, and next week, the Blues have 4 games, including Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. So that's a guy who I think you might want to keep your eye on and could be someone who could make for a nice ad for that later part of the week, where you're going to be able to get a bunch of off-night games from him, while hopefully he is maintaining this level of play. And I'm going to cheat here, Jeremy. I'm going to throw in one more guy who is not on our prep document. But we got to talk a little bit about Wyatt Johnston, not only because he has a goal and an assist against LA tonight, but also because he is on that top line with Rope Hintz and Jason Robertson. His goal is assisted by both of those stars. That's really interesting and exciting to see. Joe Pavelski is still making do. He scored from his line, but interesting to see Pavelski off that top line and that, young guns trio of Johnston, Hintz, and Robertson taking over on the first line, at least for today. That to me makes Wyatt Johnston a really interesting potential ad, especially if the team sort of feels like this is where they want to go moving forward. That could potentially be an opportunity for someone to jump on if he's out there as a free agent. I'm just adding this at the last second, so I don't know what the schedule looks like next week or in the future, but just something to think about. Could be a really great opportunity.
As the Dallas beat writer who tweeted out the lines today said, the future is now. They got all the kids up on one line, and it looks really good.
Yeah, that's super exciting. So, take a peek and see what's going on there. All right. Well, that brings us, Jeremy, to the end of our show. Thank you everybody for joining us. Please be sure to give us a follow at ShortShiftsKK. Of course, you can find Brian and Elon at Keeping Carlsson. You can use GameDayTweets.com to get the best information from Twitter without having to search for it yourself, including searching team by team, searching goalies, searching by player name. You can visit that site and the other great sites that we use to research our episodes at Yahoo, Frozen Tools, Icy Data, ShiftChart.com, and Natural Stat Trick. Our intro and outro music was created by Pat Roach. John Reed is our digital media producer. And until we see you next time, play smart and keep your shifts short.